The plate held three things: a chicken bone with a thread of meat still clinging to it, a heel of bread gone hard at the edge, a spoonful of jollof rice that had dried at the bottom of the warming tray on the 14th floor of Okereke Holdings, the tallest glass tower on Adeola Odeku Street in Victoria Island, Lagos. Adaeze lifted the bone to her mouth in the cold storeroom behind the executive kitchen, and that was the exact moment the door swung open and the light came in and Chinyere saw her. "So?" Chinyere's voice was soft, the knife soft of something very sharp. "The cleaner eats the boss's food now." Adaeze lowered the bone. She did not drop it. She set it back on the plate the way you return something you mean to honor. "It was going to the bin," she said. "I asked Madam in the kitchen. She said take it." "Madam in the kitchen does not run this floor." Chinyere stepped inside. She was 36, sharp-shouldered in a wax print blazer, the color of a ripe mango. Gold hoops swinging, and she carried a clipboard like women carry a weapon. "I run this floor, and I do not pay you to scavenge like a goat behind the market." "I did not steal, Ma. You ate from the director's tray." Chinyere wrote something on her clipboard. The pen moved fast. "That is theft. That is what it is called when the help puts the company's property in its mouth." "The directors had finished, Ma. Madam in the kitchen was scraping the tray into the bin when I asked her." "So now you argue with me?" Chinyere's pen stopped. She looked up, and there was something almost pleased in her face, the look of a woman who has been handed the exact excuse she wanted. 11 months you have mopped here and kept your mouth shut, and the one time you open it, it is to tell me a cleaner has the right to eat the director's food. No, no, my dear. That is not how it works in this building." She underlined whatever she had written, twice. "Let me explain something to you, since the village did not. There are people in this tower who matter, and there are people who clean up after the people who matter. You have confused the two." Behind Chinyere, 2 of the junior accounts girls had drifted to the doorway, drawn by the raised voice the way ants find spilled sugar. Ifeoma in her tight blue dress. The other one, the new one, with the long lashes. They were not laughing yet. They were waiting to see if laughing would be safe. Adaeze stood very still in her faded gray uniform with the company crest stitched crooked over the heart, her slippers worn thin at the heel, a headscarf knotted plain over braids that had not been redone in 2 months because the salon cost money she sent home instead. She was 24. She had been mopping the glass corridors of Okereke Holdings for 11 months. And she looked at Chinyere's mango blazer and her gold hoops and her fast pen. And she said nothing, because she had learned that silence cost less than the truth. "Empty your pockets," Chinyere said. Adaeze turned her uniform pockets out. A folded 1,000 naira note, soft from being folded and unfolded. A single sweet in a twist of paper. A passport photograph of a small boy with a gap in his front teeth. Chinyere picked up the photograph between 2 fingernails. "Yours?" "My son, Chinonso." "Where is his father?" "He is with my mother in the village, in Newi." Adaeze's hand moved just barely toward the photograph, then stopped. "I send money every month. That is why I am here." Chinyere looked at the gap-toothed boy. For one breath, something almost moved in her face. Then it closed, smooth and final and certain. She dropped the photograph back into Adaeze's open hand. The photograph landed face up on Adaeze's palm beside the soft 1,000 naira note. On the back of it, in pencil, in her own hand, were the words she had written the day she put her son on the bus to Niwi, for when the floor is cold, She had looked at the back of that photograph more than the front, these 11 months. Cinieri had not turned it over. Cinieri never turned anything over. That, Adaise would think later, was the whole of her. "You will not be here much longer," Cinieri said. She walked out, and the two girls scattered ahead of her, and Adaise stood alone in the cold storeroom with 1,000 naira, a sweet, a photograph of her son, and a plate of scraps she would now never finish. That was a Monday. The board meeting was on Friday. There were 4 days between them, and everything that mattered happened in those 4 days, though almost no one in that glass tower understood what they were watching while it happened in front of them. What none of them knew, not Cinieri with her clipboard, not the girls in their bright dresses, not the directors who walked past Adaise every morning without seeing her, was this. The mop in Adaise's hands and the name on the deed of the building were the same name, Okereke. She was not Adaise the cleaner. She was Adaise Okereke, and her late father, Chief Bartholomew Okereke, had built this company out of one warehouse and 40 years of stubbornness, and when he died 18 months before, he had left it all to the daughter no one in Lagos had ever met, because he had sent her away as a child to be raised plain and humble in Niue, far from the people who would have flattered her, so that she would grow up knowing the worth of a person who had nothing. And before she would sit in his chair, she had decided one thing. She would clean its floors first. She would learn who her people truly were when they did not know she was watching. She had been watching for 11 months, and what she had learned she kept in a worn leather folder her father's lawyer had given her the day she put on the gray uniform for the first time. On the inside cover, her father had written in his own slow hand, "Who is kind when there is nothing to gain." Below that heading she had written names, for 11 months, some on one side, some on the other. She knew things about this building that the directors did not. She knew the night guard, Sunday, kept a kettle behind the generator house and brewed tea for the Danfo drivers who slept in the car park and asked nothing for it. She knew the woman in the kitchen, the one they called Madam, set aside the unsold meat pies each evening for the apprentice boys at the printing press 2 streets down, and lied on the order book to cover the cost, and that her lie cost the company 400 naira a week and bought 4 hungry boys a supper. And Addis had decided in her first month that this was a lie her father would have signed himself. She knew which lift opened slow and which director pretended not to see her bucket and stepped over the wet floor in his fine shoes rather than wait. Her father had taught her that a house tells the truth to whoever holds the broom. She finished the Monday shift on her knees, wiping the smear of someone's spilled coffee from the marble of the director's corridor. She rode the staff lift down 40 floors, the one at the back that smelled of disinfectant. She walked the long way to the bus stop, so the rain would have stopped by the time she reached it. And in her single rented room in Surulere that night, by the light of one bulb, she opened the leather folder and added a line. That Monday night, under the side her father had marked with a small cross, she wrote, "Cinieri, storeroom, the boy's photograph." She had a chance to be human, and she chose the clipboard. She did not write it in anger. She wrote it the way her father had taught her to write everything, like a record that one day someone would have to answer for. On Tuesday, it rained from the morning, the kind of Lagos rain that turns the gutters into rivers, and Adase came in soaked to the knee because the Danfo had broken down at Falomo, and she had walked the last stretch. She left wet footprints across the lobby marble. She was on her hands and knees mopping them up before the 8 o'clock crowd arrived when a pair of polished black shoes stopped at the edge of her wet patch. She looked up. The man was tall, near 6 foot, broad through the shoulders, in a charcoal suit with no tie and a white shirt open at the collar. Near 30, a clean, strong jaw with a shadow of stubble, warm, dark brown eyes, short, neat hair. She did not know his face. There were 300 people in this building, and she knew the ones who looked at her and the ones who did not. And she had never seen this one. "I'm sorry," she said, scrambling to gather the mop. "It is wet here, sir. Let me—" "Don't." He had already stepped around the puddle, light on his feet, and now he crouched down to her level so that his good shoes were on the wet marble too, ruining the shine, and he did not seem to notice or care. "You walked in this rain?" "The bus broke down." "From where?" "Surulere." He let out a low breath, almost a laugh, not unkind. "That is far in this weather." He looked at her thin slippers, at the hem of her uniform dark with water to the shin. Then he reached into his jacket and brought out a clean white handkerchief, folded in a square, and he held it out to her. "Your face is wet." Adaze did not take it. In 11 months, no one in this building had offered her anything but instructions. "I am only the cleaner, sir. I know what you are." He said it gently, and there was something underneath it she could not place. Something almost like a question he already knew the answer to. He pressed the handkerchief into her hand and closed her fingers over it. His own hand was warm. "Dry your face. The lobby can wait 2 minutes for a clean man's reflection." Then he stood, and he walked to the lift, and Ifeoma, the accounts girl, who had just come through the revolving door shaking out her umbrella, watched the whole thing with her mouth a little open. Adaze knelt there on the wet marble with a stranger's handkerchief in her fist. That night she opened the leather folder and turned to the empty side. The side that was almost bare. She wanted to write the man down, but she did not have his name. So she wrote only, "The man in the charcoal suit, crouched on the wet floor in good shoes, did not have to." She did not yet know that the man in the charcoal suit was Obinna Madu, and that he had flown in from Port Harcourt 3 days before to do one job, to chair the Friday board meeting at which the new owner of Okareka Holdings, a woman none of the directors had ever laid eyes on, would finally claim her father's company. He was the lawyer her father had trusted. He had given her the leather folder 18 months ago in a quiet office, and he had not recognized her on her knees in the lobby, because the photograph he carried of Chief Okarex's daughter was 8 years old, taken when she was a girl in Niue with round cheeks and no grief in her face. But she had recognized something in him, even without the name. She had recognized a man who crouched. That same Tuesday, an hour after the handkerchief, something happened in the lobby that Adaze did not write in the folder at all, because it did not need writing. She would never forget it on her own. An old woman came through the revolving door. She was small and bent, in a faded George wrapper gone soft with washing, and she carried a raffia basket of bitter leaf and ugu she had clearly hoped to sell at the door to the office workers. The security man moved to turn her out, gently, but to turn her out. And the old woman's basket caught the edge of the turning door and tipped, and the green leaves spilled across the polished marble that Adaeze had just that minute finished mopping. Ifeoma, passing with her coffee, laughed. "Ah, Mama, this is not the market." 2 of the men by the lift laughed with her. The old woman went down onto her knees on the wet marble to gather her leaves, and her hands were shaking, and no one moved. Then a charcoal suit knelt beside her. Obinna gathered the bitter leaf into the basket with both hands, leaf by leaf, unhurried. And when it was full, he did not give the old woman money. That would have been easy, and it would have been alms. He bought the whole basket at the price she would have asked for 1 bunch, and he asked her to carry the rest up to the staff canteen and sell it to the kitchen, and he told the security man to let her come every Tuesday. The old woman blessed him in Igbo all the way to the lift. Ifeoma had stopped laughing. She did not understand what she had just lost in the eyes of the one person in the building whose opinion would, by Friday, decide everything. Adeze stood by her bucket and watched. She thought, there are two ways to kneel in this lobby: to gather another person's spilled leaves, or to gather your own scattered pride. She had watched 11 months of people who only knew the second kind. Wednesdays when the company began to break, though no one above the 14th floor noticed it for what it was. It started small. A whisper in the staff canteen that the audit was coming, that the new owner was real, that someone at the top had been moving money where money should not move. Adaz heard it by being invisible in the corner with a cloth in her hand, while people who thought she could not understand English spoke freely over their rice. She had counted over those months the things that did not add up. There were 3 streams, and she had separated them in her head, holding each one steady. There was the kitchen, where Chinyere's clipboard never matched the actual orders, and the difference every week was about 18,000 naira, and 18,000 naira a week. Across the 45 weeks Adaizi had been counting came to 810,000 naira gone into a pocket that was not the company's. There were the warehouse invoices, paid in full for cement that arrived less than a third of what was ordered. Almost 900,000 naira on the cartons alone. And there was the driver, Emeka, the transport clerk's cousin, paid for runs to Ibadan and Onitsha that the fuel logs proved no vehicle had ever made. Close to 290,000 more. She had not rounded any of it. She had carried each stream separately and added them only once, late when she was sure. Almost 2 million naira, lifted out of her father's company by people who thought a cleaner could not count past her wages. She was not a cleaner pretending to read ledgers. Her father had taught her figures at the kitchen table in Newi before she could plait hair. The plain girl from the village could read a balance sheet faster than the men in the suits. And the men in the suits did not know it. And that was the whole point of the 11 months. The Saturday before, she had cleaned the warehouse office in Apapa. She remembered it now, mopping the canteen floor. She remembered going in with her bucket through the side door the storeman left open, and finding the long shelves that the order book said held 40 cartons of imported tiling cement at 31,000 naira the carton. She remembered standing in the dust with the mop forgotten in her hand and counting the cartons on the shelf. Not 40, 11. She had walked the length of the empty shelving twice to be sure, her slippers leaving prints in the floury dust. And where the missing 29 cartons should have stood there was only a rectangle of clean concrete and a single torn delivery note someone had crumpled and dropped. She smoothed the note flat against her knee. The signature on it was a name no real driver in the transport office answered to. She took a photograph of it with the cracked phone she kept in her sock, and another of the 11 cartons, and another of the empty shelf. And she folded the torn note into her uniform and mopped the office and went home. And that night, she did the multiplication. 29 cartons at 31,000 naira. 899,000 naira of cement that had been paid for and had never arrived, on one order, on one Saturday. That was only the warehouse. There was the kitchen on top of it, and the driver on top of that. She kept a running total in her head, and the total was the reason she had stayed those months when one would have told her enough. On Wednesday at noon, Chinyere called her into the small HR office off the 14th floor corridor. Ifeoma was there, and the new girl with the lashes, and a security man by the door with his arms folded. A small audience arranged. "Sit," Chinyere said. There was no chair for Adeze to sit in. She remained standing. Chinyere noticed and smiled. The CCTV in the kitchen storeroom, she said, shows you eating from the director's tray on Monday. I have reported it upstairs. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A termination letter, already printed, already dated Friday. You are dismissed. Effective end of business this Friday. You will hand in your uniform and your access card. There will be no severance, because there is no severance for thieves. Ifeoma made a small sound behind her hand. The new girl looked at the floor. You see how she stands there? Chinyere said to the room, to her small arranged audience. No shame. They have no shame, these village ones. You give them a uniform and a key, and they think the building belongs to them. She tapped the desk with one gold-ringed finger. 3 years I have managed this floor. 3 years, and not one kobo out of place. Then this one comes from Surulere with her one wrapper and her cracked phone, and suddenly there are whispers about the books. Whispers. You think it is a coincidence? She smiled. When the audit comes, I will be very happy to show them whose hands have been in the kitchen tray. It was a clever move, and Adaeze noted it carefully. Chinyere had decided to make the cleaner the thief before the cleaner could become the witness. The CCTV of the storeroom was real. The 810,000 was real too. Chinyere meant to drown the second in the first. Adaeze picked up the letter. She read it slowly, all of it. And Chinyere watched her read it and could not understand why the cleaner was not crying. Friday, Adaeze said. Friday, end of business. There is a board meeting on Friday. Adaeze set the letter back on the desk, squared it neatly to the edge. On the 14th floor, in the big room, 3 o'clock. The room went still in a way that had no name. Chinyere's gold hoops stopped swinging. What? She said slowly. Would the board meeting have to do with a thief who mops floors? Nothing, Ma. Adaeze folded her hands in front of her gray uniform. I only know the times because I cleaned the room before. I will clean it before 3, then I will hand in my uniform after, so that the room is ready for the new owner. Chinyere laughed then, and Ifeoma laughed because Chinyere did. And the laugh was the cruel kind. The kind that fills a small room and leaves no air for the person it lands on. The new owner. Chinyere wiped the corner of her eye. You hear yourself. You think the new owner of a company worth 4 billion naira cares whether the cleaner dusted the chairs? Get out. Clean the room Friday if you like. It is the last room you will ever clean in this building. Adaeze went to the door. She stopped with her hand on it, and she turned. And she looked at Chinyere for a moment that lasted slightly too long. My father used to say, Adaeze said quietly, that pride eats fastest from the highest plate. Then she opened the door and went out to fetch her mop. And Chinyere sat there with the strange feeling of a door having closed somewhere she could not see. That night the list grew. Under the cross side, Adaeze added in her steady hand, Wednesday, the HR office, the letter dated before the crime was proven, the audience she arranged to watch me break, and then, lower, 3 lines, the figures she had carried in her head for weeks, set down at last in ink. Kitchen, 810,000. Warehouse cement, 899,000. The driver who never drove, 289,000. Almost 2 million naira. She closed the folder. She looked at the photograph of Chinonso on the wall by her bed, the gap-toothed boy. She had not seen him in 7 months. Soon, she told him silently. Soon I will be done watching, and I will come home, and we will never count this small again. There was one more thing that Wednesday. and it belonged on the empty side, the kind side. Late, near closing, Adais was mopping the back stair when she heard a woman crying in the small prayer room the staff kept off the canteen. She looked in. It was Ngozi, one of the directors, the tall one who wore the striking gold head wrap to the big meetings, who Adais had clocked months ago as a woman who arrived first and stayed last. She was not crying for herself. She was on the phone, telling someone, her brother by the sound of it, that she had paid the school fees again, that the children would not be sent home, that he should stop thanking her, because that is what family does. When she rang off, she saw the cleaner in the doorway, and was, for a moment, ashamed to be seen. "I am sorry, Ma," Adaize said. "I will come back." "No." Ngozi wiped her face with the back of her hand and laughed at herself. "It is fine. Sit 1 minute, my sister. My feet are finished." And she, a director in a 4 billion naira company, moved her own handbag off the second chair so that the cleaner could sit, and asked Adaize whether she had eaten. And when Adaize said yes, a lie, Ngozi took a wrapped meat pie from her bag and put it in the cleaner's hand and said, "Take it for the road. Surulere is far." She did not know the cleaner owned the building. She had nothing to gain. She gave the meat pie to a tired woman, because the woman looked tired. That night, on the empty side of the list, Adaize wrote the second name it had ever held. Ngozi, the prayer room. She paid another family's school fees and called it nothing. She gave me her own meat pie and moved her bag so I could sit. She did not know. 2 names now stood on the kind side, Obinna and Ngozi. Her father had been right that it would be a short list. He had not told her how short or how much it would mean to find even 2. Thursday she almost broke. It is honest to say so. Thursday was the day the rent man came to the room in Surulere, and the landlord raised the rent by 10,000 naira. And Adaize paid it from the folded notes in her tin and was left with very little. Because the daughter who secretly owned a 4 billion naira company had decided, as part of the watching, to live exactly as the watching required. On a cleaner's wage, owing what a cleaner owes, eating what a cleaner eats. Her father's lawyer had begged her not to. She had insisted. "You cannot know a house," her father had written in the folder, "by standing in the doorway. You must sleep in every room." On Thursday, the bus fare took the last of the small notes, and she walked part of the way and arrived at the tower with a blister opening on her heel. And she was mopping the 14th floor corridor outside the big boardroom, when she heard, through the door, left ajar, "Chinyere," on the telephone. "It is handled," Chinyere was saying. "Chinyere. The cleaner takes the fall for the kitchen shortfall. The books are clean by Friday, and by the time the new owner counts anything, there is nothing to count. A village girl from Surulere. No one will ask after her." A pause. A laugh. "Of course I feel nothing." "You do not feel sorry for a goat at Christmas." Adaize stood in the corridor with the mop still in her hand and the dirty water trembling in the bucket. And for the length of 3 slow breaths she wanted. More than she had wanted anything in those 11 months. To push open that door and say her own name out loud and watch it take Chinyere's face apart. She did not. She closed her eyes. She thought of her father's hands at the kitchen table, slow with the sickness, writing the heading at the top of the list. He had not built the list for revenge. He had built it so his daughter would never mistake a smiling face for a safe one. Tomorrow, she told herself. Not in a corridor, not with a mop. Tomorrow, in his chair. She opened her eyes. She wrung the mop. She finished the corridor on her bleeding heel and on the staff lift down, she leaned her forehead against the cool steel wall and let exactly 2 tears fall, no more, and wiped them with the handkerchief she had not given back. The clean white square from Obinna, carried in her pocket for 2 days now, like a small proof that the kind side of the list was not empty. In the lobby on the way out, she passed the old woman with the raffia basket, the one from Tuesday, who had come back to sell her bitter leaf to the kitchen as Obinna had arranged. The old woman caught a Daisy's arm and looked at her tired face and her wet hem, and pressed a single bunch of ugu into her hands. "You did not buy?" she said. "But I see you, my daughter. The Lord sees the one who is not seen." Daisy took the leaves and could not answer. 2 days from sitting in the highest chair in the building, the only person who had truly seen her all week was an old woman selling greens at the door. She carried the ugu home in her fist, the way she might carry evidence of something she would soon be asked to prove. When she got home, there was a knock at her door. She froze. No one knocked on her door in Surulere. She opened it on the chain. It was Obinna Maid. He stood in the dim corridor of the building holding a copy of the leather folder, and his face, when he saw her, was not the face of a stranger anymore. "Chief Okereke's daughter," he said very quietly so the neighbors could not hear. "I have looked for you for 2 days in the wrong place. I should have known to look on the floor." He bowed his head, an old gesture, the respect a man gives to the one who owns the house. "Forgive me, Ma. I did not know you when I gave you my handkerchief. I am Obinna Madu. I was your father's lawyer. I am the one who must put you in his chair tomorrow." Adeze opened the door the rest of the way. "You crouched," she said, "before you knew." "What?" "On the wet floor, in your good shoes. You crouched for the cleaner before you knew the cleaner was the owner. And on Tuesday, you gathered an old woman's bitter leaf off the marble while 3 people laughed, and you bought her whole basket so it would not be alms." She stepped back to let him in. A man can pretend to be kind for 1 day if he knows who is watching. He cannot pretend it for a week when he believes no one is. That is the only reference I needed. You are on the right side of the list. Obinna stepped into the small room. 1 bulb, 1 bed, a tin of folded notes, a photograph of a gap-toothed boy taped to the wall. And he looked at it the way you look at a thing that humbles you. "Your father told me you would do this," he said quietly. "Before he died. He said, 'She will not believe a written reference. She will go and check the house herself, with a broom, and she will be right too.'" He shook his head. "I did not think he meant it so literally. 11 months, Ma, on your knees, when you could have walked in on the first day and sat in the chair." "If I had walked in on the first day," Adeze said, "I would have met the 8 directors and the office manager in their best clothes, all smiling, all calling me madam. I would have learned nothing." She set the kettle on. "You learn what a person is by how they treat you when you are nothing to them. My father learned it the hard way, building this company. He gave me the easy way. He gave me a uniform." She showed him the list that night, all 11 months of it. The cross and the no cross, the figures she had carried in her head and the names she had written in her steady hand. Obinna read it slowly, with both hands, and when he reached the 2 streams of missing funds, set down in numbers clear enough for any courtroom, he looked up. "You have the proof?" "I have the warehouse shelves I dusted that were empty, 11 cartons standing where 40 were paid for. I have the torn delivery note with a driver's name no driver answers to. I have the kitchen orders that never match the clipboard, week after week, 18,000 naira at a time. I have the fuel logs that prove the Ibadan runs never happened. I photographed all of it on Saturdays when I cleaned the transport office, with the cracked phone I keep in my sock. Adazi closed the folder. I have 11 months, and tomorrow I have my father's chair. They did not overplan it. There was nothing to plan. The room would assemble itself. The proud always come to the high table on their own legs. Friday, 3 o'clock. The big boardroom on the 14th floor of Okareka Holdings. At 2:45, Adais came in with her bucket and her cloth and her crooked crested gray uniform. And she dusted the long mahogany table, and she polished the tall chairs, and she wiped the glass that looked out over all of Lagos to the gray shine of the lagoon. She took her time at the head of the table. She ran the cloth along the arms of the tall owner's chair, the worn dark wood, and she remembered the same arms under her own small hands at 6 years old in Niue, when her father had lifted her into a chair just like it and told her, "This is not a seat for resting, Ada. This is a seat for carrying. Whoever sits here carries everyone who stands." She had been too small to understand it. She understood it now, with a blister on her heel and a mop in her hand, better than any of the 8 people about to walk through the door. She polished the chair, and she did not sit in it. Not yet. She set her bucket against the far wall by the window, where a cleaner's bucket belongs, and she waited. The directors began to arrive, 8 of them in agbada and dark suits, and Ngozi in her tall gold head wrap. Chinyere came too, because the office manager attends to take the minutes, and she carried her clipboard. And when she saw the cleaners still in the room, she clicked her tongue. "You. Out. The board does not need a goat in the corner." "One moment, Ma," Adayese said. "I am not yet finished." The directors took their chairs along the sides of the long table. At the head stood the owner's chair, taller than the rest, dark wood, the arms worn smooth by 40 years of Chief Bartholomew Okareke's hands. No one sat in it. No one ever sat in it. It had stood empty for 18 months, the way a throne stands between a king and his heir. Obinamadu entered last, in a black suit, the leather folder under his arm, and the directors stood for him because the lawyer who reads the will is, for 1 hour, the most powerful man in the room. He set the folder on the table. He looked down its length, past the 8 directors, past Chinyere with her clipboard, to the cleaner standing at the foot of the room with a cloth in her hand. "Before we begin," Obina said, "the new owner of Okareka Holdings is present in this building and will join us now." The directors murmured. They straightened their agbada. Ngozi touched her earring. Every eye went to the great glass door at the side of the room, waiting for it to open, waiting for some woman to sweep in from the lift in red lace and gold, the way an owner arrives. The door did not open. Instead, at the foot of the table, Adayese Okareka set down her cloth. She untied the plain headscarf and folded it once and laid it on the bucket. She did not change her clothes. She did not need a red sequin gown to do what came next. In her faded gray uniform with the crooked crest, with the blister on her heel and the photograph of her son in her pocket, she walked the length of her father's boardroom, past the 8 standing directors, past Chinyere, whose clipboard had begun, very slightly, to shake. And she stopped at the head of the table. And she sat down in the owner's chair. The arms of it were worn smooth, smooth from 40 years of one man's hands, and they fit her own as though the wood had been waiting 18 months for exactly these hands and no others. She set her palms flat on them. She did not grip. A person who grips a thing is afraid of losing it. She had not come to take a chair. She had come home to one. For a moment, no one breathed. Ngozi, the tall director in the gold head wrap, the one who had moved her handbag so a cleaner could sit, the one who had pressed a meat pie into a tired stranger's hand 2 days before, was the first to understand. Her eyes went from the gray uniform to the worn chair to the lawyer's open folder, and her hand went to her mouth. And what came up in her face was not fear. It was something closer to wonder. The look of a person who has just learned that a small kindness she gave away freely was witnessed by the one pair of eyes in all of Lagos that mattered most. Then the rest of the directors understood, one by one, the realization moving down the table like a current. Chinyere laughed. It came out cracked. This is a joke. This is the cleaner. This is the thief I dismissed on Monday for eating from the tray. Madame Obinna, remove her. She has lost her mind. Her name, Obinna said, opening the leather folder, his voice carrying to every corner of the glass room, is Adize Okereke. She is the only daughter of Chief Bartholomew Okereke, who built this company from one warehouse in Apapa across 40 years. By the will I am holding, she is the sole owner of Okereke Holdings. Every share, every floor, every chair in this room. He looked up, including the one you sat in to write her termination letter. The clipboard slipped from Chinyere's hands and clattered on the floor, and no one picked it up. Adaiz did not raise her voice. She had carried the quiet for months, and she did not need to spend it now. She folded her hands on the worn arms of her father's chair, and she looked down the long table at the people who had walked past her every morning. And she began to speak, evenly, as her father spoke. For 11 months I have cleaned this building. I did not come to spy on your work. My father asked one thing of me before he died. He asked me to learn who my people are when they think no one is watching. She let that sit. So I watched. I mopped the corridor outside this room, and I learned more about Okereke Holdings than any audit will tell you. I learned which director arrives first and stays last. I learned which of you greets the security man by his name. She let her eyes rest on Ngozi for a moment. And I learned which of you put your hand in my father's pocket. She looked at Chinyere then, only at Chinyere. 810,000 naira, Adese said, from the kitchen orders that never matched your clipboard. 18,000 naira a week, 45 weeks, drawn from the company's account into a pocket with your name on it. 899,000 from warehouse cartons paid for and never delivered. I stood in that warehouse in Apapa and counted 11 cartons where 40 should have stood, and 289,000 to a driver who never turned a wheel on a single company run. I have the orders. I have the fuel logs. I have the torn delivery note and the photograph of those 11 cartons. You signed the kitchen clipboard yourself, Ma. I can show you the column. Chinyere had gone gray under her brown. Her mouth worked. She reached, by old habit, for the clipboard that was no longer in her hands, and found only air, and the reaching was the most honest thing she had done all week. You set a trap, she whispered. You watched me for months and said nothing. You watched me eat a chicken bone in a cold room and called it theft, Adaiz said, not loudly. And in the same 11 months, you carried almost 2 million naira out the side door and called it salary. One of us was watching the wrong thing, Ma. It was not me. You are a cleaner. I was a cleaner, Adaize said. You taught me what a cleaner is worth in this building. 3 scraps on a plate and a letter with no severance. You called my son's photograph nothing. You called me a goat at Christmas. On the telephone, on Thursday, outside that door. She nodded toward it. I was on the other side of it with my mop. The room was utterly silent. 2 of the directors had turned their faces away from Chinyere, the way men turn from someone the lightning is about to find. Here is what will happen, Adaize said, and now she did not sound tired at all. Madhu, You will hand the file on the missing funds to the police this evening, and the board will cooperate fully, because a company that hides one thief soon owns 10. She turned back to Chinière. You wanted me out by end of business today. You will have your wish. Hand in your access card to the security man at the door, the one whose name you never learned, and the money will be repaid to this company to the last kobo, or the police will collect it the slower way. Chinière opened her mouth. Nothing came. She bent finally and picked up her own fallen clipboard. And the gesture was so small and so beaten that even Ifeoma, watching through the glass wall from the corridor where the whole 14th floor had now gathered, looked away from it. Chinière walked the length of the boardroom she had ruled for 3 years, past the chair she had sat in to write the letter, and she handed her access card to the security man at the door, and he took it without a word, and she was gone. Adise let out a slow breath. The hardest part was over, and it had not felt like triumph. It had felt like setting down a weight she had carried up 40 flights of stairs. Then she stood, and she did the thing her father would have done. To the rest of you, she said to the 8 directors, and the crowd pressed against the glass. I am not my father's ghost. I am his daughter, and I was your cleaner, and I will be neither now. From Monday I sit in this chair as your chairman. The ones among you who were kind when there was nothing to gain. I have your names, and that does not forget. She let the smallest warmth come into her voice. Okereke Holdings was built by a man who started with one warehouse and a pair of worn shoes. We will not become the kind of place where the person who mops the floor is called a goat. Not while I sit in his chair. There was a silence, and then Ngozi began to clap, slowly, and then the directors joined. And then the corridor beyond the glass, and the sound filled the tower 14 floors above Lagos. Obinamadu closed the leather folder and looked at the woman in the worn gray uniform sitting in the tall worn chair, and he smiled. The smile of a man who has waited 18 months for a thing to come out right. There is more, and it is good, and it is short, because the kind do not need long endings. The police came for the file that evening. Adise did not let it become a circus. She gave Chinière a choice the law would not have offered. Repay the full amount with her own hand, kobo by kobo, and keep her freedom. Or keep the money and learn what a cell smells like. Chinière chose the slow road home. The first payment came that same Friday night, before the lights of the tower went off. The 810,000 from the kitchen, drawn from a savings account no office manager's salary could explain, and the debt fell from almost 2 million naira to just over 1 million. The second came 11 days later. When she sold the second car, the salary could not explain, and the debt fell again, steeply, by 899,000. The last payment, the driver's share, the smallest and the most shameful, came on the final day of the month in a brown envelope she carried up to the 14th floor herself and set on the security man's desk, the security man whose name she had finally learned. And the balance fell from 289,000 to nothing. She did not look up at the glass-walled office where the cleaner now sat as chairman. She did not have to. She had learned late what the cleaner she despised had known all along. That the eye you cannot see is often the eye that matters most. Ngozi, in the gold head wrap, was made deputy chairman before the month was out. The director who had paid a stranger's school fees and called it nothing now signed for a company she had quietly kept honest for years. The security man, whose name no one had known, was given his name back. Adise greeted him as Mr. Adebayo every morning, and saw to it the whole floor did the same. The old woman with the raffia basket kept her Tuesday spot at the door for as long as she lived, and the kitchen bought her whole basket every week, and no one ever laughed at her in that lobby again. Adaise did not move into a mansion in a week. The glow-up the building gossiped about did not come in red sequins overnight. It came slower, and it came truer. She moved her son Chinonso up from Newi and put him in a good school in Lagos. And on the first morning, he came to the tower in his uniform. With a gap-toothed grin, she lifted him up so he could see the lagoon from the 14th floor, just as her own father had once lifted her into a chair too big for her small hands. And she told him the same thing. This is not a seat for resting. She did upgrade, in time, a proper home in Ikoyi, and yes, eventually, a gala, and yes, eventually, a deep red gown that made the room turn. But she wore it as she had worn the gray uniform, like a woman who knew exactly what a person is worth with nothing in their pocket. She kept the crooked, crested gray uniform folded in a drawer in the chairman's office, where she could see it every day, so she would never forget. And she kept one more thing on the wall behind the owner's chair, framed now, where every director who entered would have to read it. Not a portrait of her father, his handwriting, the heading from the list, in his own slow hand from the months before he died. Who is kind when there is nothing to gain? The man who had crouched on a wet floor for a cleaner became, in the fullness of a year and a courtship her late father would have blessed, the man who stood beside her chair. Not above it, beside it. And he never once let her forget that he had been kind before he knew. And she never once let him think she had forgotten it either, because it was the first thing she had written on the empty side of the list. That is the whole of it. A proud woman looked at a humble one and saw a goat behind the market. God saw something else. He saw a daughter learning her father's house from the floor up, and he let the proud climb to the highest plate so that the whole tower could watch them fall from it. The same clipboard that wrote a cleaner's dismissal slipped from its owner's hands the moment the cleaner stood. The same storeroom where a hungry woman was shamed for a chicken bone became the storeroom outside the room where she took her father's chair. The eye that could not be seen, the cleaner's eye, low to the floor, that everyone stepped over, turned out to be the one eye that saw everything and forgot nothing. Kindness with nothing to gain was the only currency that counted in that glass building. And on Friday, at 3 o'clock, it bought a worn gray cleaner, the one chair no money in Lagos could buy. If this story warmed your heart, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? And if you would stand with Adaise, if you believe the humble will yet sit in the high chair, then say it with me. Kindness remembers, pride forgets, and the floor a proud woman makes you scrub is sometimes the very floor from which God lifts you to the throne. So tell me where you are watching from tonight. From Lagos, from London, from Houston, from Port of Spain, from Nairobi. And tell me your own name in the comments, because the woman in this story learned that a name is the first thing the proud forget and the last thing God ever does. Team Adaise, I will see you in the next one.